the point that I think Timothy made at the beginning, it's about trust. So when you're providing information to your customers, in our case it's professional customers, it's lawyers, it's tax accountants, it's scientists, and it's the world of media, trust is vital. Because if they lose trust in your data, then your whole business proposition is sunk. So although we talk about the world of connecting data, of transparency, open data, as Mr. Abamonte talked about, is very important. We connect those markets globally, but unless it's trusted, it isn't going to work. So let me give you a few examples. This is a Reuters example. So often when there's a crisis in the world, the TV footage you see on your Belgian TV, your American TV, your British TV is typically from Reuters. We're the only global news agency. We're the only people that typically have people on the ground. So the Arab Spring, those early pictures from Tahrir Square, they were all from our cameramen on the ground. CNN actually puts this from Reuters. All the other TV companies don't, because we don't care, right? They all take the same photos. One of the challenges of technology, even for Reuters, is that people are now filming this stuff on their mobile phones, and they're emailing it around the world. So whereas before we had early access to that, now everybody, or a lot of people, have access to it. But again, one of the challenges is it reliable? So we double check all our sources. So we've actually had instances in the last couple of years of TV companies showing videos of events in Egypt, or in particular in Syria more recently, which we have not shown because we don't know that they're real. We don't know they haven't been faked. And some of them, there was one famous example where it turned out to be actually not from Syria at all. We've also had examples of our photographs being manipulated. People can manipulate photographs to do mashups. One very famous example of an incident in Syria which turned out to be, was alleged to be a Reuters photograph. In fact, it was a Reuters photograph that had been changed by somebody for political purposes. Hugely risky for us. We have journalists on the ground in Syria whose lives are at risk. We've also had hacking, and we talked about security at the beginning. The Free Syrian Army hacked into Reuters and put out stories in the name of the Free Syrian Army. So even in a journalism business, you can see the huge benefits of technology, but also the risks. Here are just some practical examples of things that we can do. This is sentiment. As I said earlier, there are other companies out there who track sentiment on social media. This is interesting. This is we have a trust index and a sentiment index. It turns out, interestingly, that it's tracking the performance of the financial companies very accurately. So this is a track of financial sentiment recently. If you go back to the crisis, 2008 onwards, it's actually a very striking chart. So you can use big data to track sentiment, which in turn actually informs financial markets. Another example in our financial business is in our commodities business. We're probably the biggest provider of commodity information, raw materials in particular. We track ships using other companies' satellites. Much to the amazement of some of the shipping companies, you can tell from infrared what's in the tanker, you can tell whether it's grain or oil, you can track it around the world, it moves markets. We track climate change. So that I think that's a hugely interesting area for agricultural companies, for governments. You can start to track food shortages. You can track movements in if an oil tanker gets stuck somewhere. If there's an incident in the world, the oil price jumped recently when one particularly large tanker got stuck somewhere. That's the kind of information that you can track. But we're giving that information, it's all essentially public information, to the financial professionals. And it's immediately accessible to a wide range of customers. Managing that data is a challenge. We referred to that earlier. This is shows you this is exponential growth in traffic peaks. So we track, we gather information from public markets, from stock exchanges, if you like, all around the world. Thankfully, we invested in capacity. This is a chart of the number of price changes, if you like, we have to make. I think at the moment we're up to about 2.5 million price changes a second. Enormous capacity challenges, enormous distribution challenges as well to the customer base. There are 40 million securities around the world, all of which, the larger financial services clients that we have want to track. This is just to show you a slightly complicated chart, but it's showing you about the indices on the top, and it's showing you some of the moving averages. Again, this is called charting. On our one of the major changes we've made to our technology the last few years is instant charting. So people can choose what they put on the charts. So again, on my previous slide, one of the challenges of humans is to keep up with the predictive power of machines analyzing this data. That's a sort of a bubble predictor. This is going back to the specifically sentiment. This is actually, we had tracking some psychological indices actually specifically in the Middle East, and you'll see that trust, I guess in July 2010 here to October 2010, you see significant drop in trust. This is in Egypt, and then in fact you can eventually, if you wanted to, you could have predicted regime change. So those are some of the examples. This is another example about the sheer volume of regulation, not least from this town. 25,000 pieces of regulatory change a year. I was briefly a compliance officer. If that was just, if you had 200 a year, that was a lot. It was 25,000 a year. So we track that. So what that means, and I'll then we'll have a discussion, is what are the challenges for both us and I think the policymakers. And I think, as somebody said at the beginning, it is a shared challenge. How do you allow for innovation? You saw the European proposals on the slide from Mr. Abamonte a minute ago. How do you ensure there is scope for disruptive innovation, whilst also addressing the security issues and also the privacy issues? How do you ensure trust? That's a huge issue for companies, as I said earlier. For us in particular, as a news agency, the accuracy point is vital. How do you ensure security? In particular, we operate, I think it was fairly obvious what I just said, on a cross-border basis. We don't really have the concept of national borders in what we do. We have European lawyers who need to check American law. We have, as I said, pharmaceutical companies checking foreign patents. We have companies wanting access to global news. How do you allow for cross-border data flows? A huge challenge, whether it's in terms of regulation, whether it's in terms of trade negotiations. Localization rules for data are a total disaster, and we need to fight those. How do you maintain privacy? Fortunately, we don't have some of the issues that some of the B2C businesses do. It is, however, a big issue for us. As Timothy, actually, if he was here, would tell you there's a clash of laws sometimes. So a very good example, take one sentence, is the money laundering legislation. So money laundering law tells you, let's say I'm a bank, I have to check you out as a customer. I have to check you, right? You may be a terrorist, you may have a criminal record. The privacy rules say, well, you can't do that, or you've got to do it very carefully. What is the answer to that? One of our products is the world's biggest anti-money laundering database. How does that fit into a world of privacy? How does it fit in, which is designed for a world of fighting terror? The European Parliament and European Commission have frankly got themselves in a bit of a pickle over that. Finally, on copyright, I think you talked about on your slide, you didn't have copyright, but you had a similar phrase, I seem to remember. Copyright, again, there's a knee-jerk reaction sometimes to say we need to change copyright. Copyright was designed in a non-digital age. That is perfectly true. It goes back to the 19th century in many European countries. How do you need to change copyright for a digital age? Maybe there's some ways you do, but fundamentally, we would argue no. The fastest growing UK export of all time, which I discovered recently, was Grand Theft Auto 5. Which comes from Yorkshire. Timothy and I are both from Yorkshire. So it comes from Wakefield, I think. It's a digital download. The people who own Grand Theft Auto 5 think the most important thing the government should do is protect IP and copyright. We think, as I just said, in our photographs, we have become tougher defenders of copyright in our photographs because we are at risk when people change them. We literally have lives at risk if you change our photographs. So I think it's a huge challenge to work out what to do about copyright. The European Commission is currently working on a copyright white paper. And finally, I think regulation. I think reputational risk probably moves faster than the law can move. I think ethics move faster than the law can move. And I think what Maureen said about being extremely cautious with proceeding with regulation is absolutely the right thing to do. Where there's clear and present danger, if you like, particularly to consumers, then you need to act. Generally, we would rather that you moved extremely slowly in the area of regulation, particularly where you can't differentiate adequately between the B2B business models and the B2C business models, where the risk of the consumer is exposed to a far lesser extent. Okay, thank you very much.